We're with today Colin Hurd. Colin is the CEO of MACH, a company in the off-road autonomy space, and we'll talk more about that. Prior to that, you were the founder and CEO of SmartAg, a company that I believe put out the first autonomous tractor in the market several years ago. And prior to that, founded a company called Agriculture Concepts that was also in the farm equipment space, a company that you founded while you were in college. So you're not more than 10 years done from Iowa State University when I met you, and you were on your third startup. You live in Ames with your wife, Kim, and 3 children. Thank you for being with us, Colin.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Kevin. And it's hard to believe 3 companies in less than 10 years. It's been a good journey.
So walk us through that journey a little bit. I gave just the high thumbnail stage, but talk us kind of how you got from where you were as an undergraduate student, beginning the process of thinking about starting what became your first company to where you are today.
Yeah, I've not totally connected all the dots in terms of how they led to here, but I would say maybe it's just a desire to keep solving problems and like bigger and bigger problems each time. With Ag Concepts, we started out with kind of a small problem, which was, had a big impact on some farms, but it was a very clear issue that was occurring with planting, creating compaction. And we tried to resolve that with a tillage tool on the planters. And then, SmartAg was sort of the next much bigger problem, which was the widespread lack of qualified labor for farms and the growing labor constraints that existed within agriculture. And so we turned to autonomy to try to solve that problem. Ended up being pretty successful at it. And then now with MACH, it's kind of gone beyond just agriculture. So the labor issue is not just an ag issue. It's really an issue across a lot of industries, but especially in the industries that require heavy machinery operation, right? It's hard to find qualified, skilled operators, whether you're trying to install solar fields or building bridges or, tilling fields. So
kind of autonomy everywhere. I remember when you pitched SmartAg to a group with some non-agricultural people in the room, and at the time, probably 2016, autonomy in vehicles was a widely discussed topic, and safety, and there'd been an accident and things like that. And so somebody sort of said, well, Colin, what about safety? And your response was something to the effect of, well, certainly is a consideration, but being in a field compared to being on a highway is something different. So, as you think about the difference between autonomy in kind of off-road spaces, whether that's agriculture or something else, compared to probably most people's point of reference, which is automobiles that are on a road, street, highway, interstate. How do you think about those differences, and from a business perspective, how you approach strategy and building businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. And I think, back in 2016, everybody figured on-road autonomy was going to lead the way. That hasn't happened, right? It's not, you can't go out there and buy really many fully autonomous vehicles, and there's not autonomous taxis driving around picking people up everywhere. And however, in the off-road space, that's not, it's actually leading now. So it was kind of lagging maybe in 2016. Now it seems to be leading. I think a big driver there is that, the environment is much more controlled off-road, right? If you're talking about a field, you have a perimeter, you have fences. There shouldn't be people just out, walking around in a field. And so because that environment can be a lot more controlled, it's actually a lot easier to put an autonomous system in there and know the level of safety that you can achieve. Now, the trade-off is that the use cases, whether it's in a field or on a construction site or in a highway, road construction, the use cases are a lot
I
different.
was going to say there's a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
No two fields are the same.
So
No two construction projects
Exactly.
are exactly the same.
You can have an autonomous tractor and it can be, very safe and highly capable, but you also have to automate, whatever it is you're going to do with that tractor, whether it's pulling a grain cart or doing tillage or planting, right? And so that's where the kind of the long tail exists within automating vehicles off-road, is each use case has unique variables that you have to account for. And so that's a big area of focus actually for us at MACH.
Mm-hmm. So that's maybe a segue into kind of the history of technology and agriculture in particular. So this series of podcasts that you'll be a part of is inspired by a case study of John Deere, the man, not the company. But in 1858, he undertook an experiment with what we today would call a tractor pulling a plow. And his company at that time just made plows, but he met somebody experimenting with it. And long story short, the steam engine that they used to power it just wasn't practical when you took it off of rails in the case of steam-powered locomotives, or took it off of a river in the case of a paddle wheel boat. And so he ultimately shut that down, and it took decades in the advent of the internal combustion engine before tractors became a thing. But they did. And so you zoom forward to about 100 years ago, and tractors were finally beginning to be widely adopted. So let's say the 1920s. And at that time, corn yields here in the state of Iowa, in the heart of the Corn Belt, would have been like 25 bushels per acre on average. Mm-hmm. Zoom forward to, and those tractors would have been 25, 30 horsepower, and it depended, but there were a lot of different kinds of tractors. But zoom forward to today, farmers in central Iowa would be disappointed most years, unless the weather's really bad, with something less than 250 bushel per acre corn, so 10 times. And it depends upon the farm as well, but you'll see at the largest size, at least, tractors that are 500 or 600 horsepower, so just monstrous, compared to what it was back then. So, we've seen this huge increase in productivity that's come in agriculture, and machinery and other technologies have played a role in that. So how do you think about technology and its role in productivity, and whether we're at sort of a just steady state increase in productivity, or whether autonomy and the things that you're working on now are more of a significant change?
Yeah, it's interesting because will autonomy increase yields? I don't know, right? It may help. May help reduce compaction. It may give farmers the ability to manage crops on a more micro level, instead of making decisions based off of an acre and what that acre needs. They may be able to start making decisions based off of a square foot and what that square foot needs. And the machinery and the technology required to, switch, a fertilizer treatment per square foot allows that to be much more tailored to the plant's needs in that area. So it may help. But I also think productivity is, it kind of depends on what you measure against. So productivity per person in agriculture should increase dramatically, right? So if you're looking at yield per farmer, that will definitely go up because of autonomy, right? Mm-hmm. The amount of ground that a single farm can manage and manage at a very high level of detail, right? Very efficiently, very sustainably, will increase as well, because they can augment themselves through technology is kind of what you're seeing, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's, a single farm manager being able to manage a fleet of tractors that are dispersed throughout, 5 different counties, or it's an on-site farmer, and he's running one machine where he has 2 autonomous machines in the field with him doing extra work. He can leverage his expertise so much more through the use of automated systems. It's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. So if we zero in on farm equipment, Very mature industry, been around for a long time, dominated by a handful of companies, but now autonomy and other technologies too have introduced the opportunity for startup companies to enter. And so one that you started, Smart Ag, sold eventually to Raven, and Raven, not that much later, was acquired by one of the bigs, Case New Holland. How do you think about kind of operating in these markets where at least pieces of them are dominated by really mature big companies with revenues in the high billions?
Right. It's I think there's pros and cons to it. The upside is if you're a company like us that sells technology to OEMs, getting one of those three, you can achieve a lot of market share really quickly in a certain area. Now, but the downside is often they have the resources, as you've seen with John Deere and Case IH, to make investments and develop technology on their own, so they can solve a lot more of their own problems. I think within the ag space, what's unique is there's still a lot of diversity in what goes behind the tractors and the companies that own the market share there. So if you're harvesting sugar beets, for example, you're not using John Deere harvesters, right? They don't make one. But that's still a big market, and it can be an important market to automate. And so I think there's still a lot of opportunity despite how much of the market's owned by those three players. One of the things that's really curious to us is how the compatibility between implements and tractors will play out. So if you have an autonomous tractor and you want to use a smart implement with it, somehow they have to communicate to each other. The traditional way that happens today is through ISOBus, which is kind of an old school CAN message based system, and it really doesn't support autonomy. So it's an area of focus for us, is how do you create the API, if you will, between an implement and a tractor. And I think some of that will be determined by the major players in the space, and everybody will have to kind of adapt and follow along to their lead. But if they do it right, who knows?
Well, we'll need our agricultural engineering department at Iowa State University to adjust their CAN bus class to something else. Huh?
Yeah. Yep.
It's a good experience for students, but something else comes next. What do you consider some of your most significant entrepreneurial moments? Which events, decisions, and people have impacted your journey most?
I've talked a lot on various forums about my experience at Iowa State. That was obviously a big part of it. Being in the ag entrepreneurship class, which you taught, just kind of opened my eyes up to, hey, maybe I don't have to go get a corporate job after. And then I did do an internship one summer while I was at school with a big company, and I realized that I didn't really fit well into that environment, and it wasn't. I was successful there, but I didn't. It just didn't appeal that much to me, right? Part of it was, I think, there's a lot of constraint around what you can and can't do, and it's not necessarily that the organization isn't innovative, or there's just a lot of layers to deal with, and it's a lot easier to go out into the field and solve a problem, for me anyways, than it is to try to convince 5 other people that have to go convince all their bosses that there's a problem worth solving, right? And then you have to negotiate about how much funding do you need and all this stuff, and by the end of the time, you have spent a year and a half just convincing people there's a problem worth solving, where I was like, I just want to go do it on my own and solve that problem in that same time period. So
individual agency and being able to kind of make things happen as you see fit was an important thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And then the other key moment, I think, which, with Ag Concepts, is kind of like, hey, I'm going to try this, see where it goes, right? I don't have a lot to lose. I can always go back and get a job if I need to. And I think one of the key moments after that was I realized as I was looking at, ag concepts had kind of wrapped up. I had this concept for an autonomy company with Smart Ag, but I had to make a decision there, right? Do I go back into another startup grind, right? Because it's not easy, and you have to do a lot of work, and there's a lot of barriers you have to overcome, especially in those first few years. And so I think my perspective on that was, I just spent 4 years of my life learning how to not do a lot of things well, and like learning a lot of hard lessons. And I was like, if I go get a corporate job at this point, I'm going to throw a lot of that education away. And so, a lot of my colleagues and peers had, after their undergrad degree went on to get PhDs or master's degrees. And I was like, I kind of just did get a 4-year degree in entrepreneurship and starting a business. And why would I not use that, So that kind of gave me a little conviction to start Smart Ag and start the journey again at that point.
So I remember one conversation where we were at the table with a couple of other entrepreneurs, one of which had just had not a complete failure, but not the greatest exit. And another entrepreneur who had a successful exit, but was looking at starting something. And so the question over beers at least was, why do we keep doing this again and again? And so part of it for you is you built up experience. You might as well use it in a certain way, but what else? Because now you're doing it again and at a larger scale.
Yeah, and this time, it's not starting from scratch, which is a little, it's intentional too, because there's an element of, starting a company from scratch that is, it can make you a little weary doing it over and over again. And so,
for people listening, MACH is you bought two companies and merged them together. Yep. Is that an accurate way to say it?
Yeah. So with the help of our financial partner in this, we acquired two businesses and merged them into the brand that is MACH. So now we're a single company with a group of about 20 employees, a lot of engineering expertise, and in a history of product and IP, and we have commercial customers, and so there's a lot that's already kind of the flywheel is moving, right? You don't have to start it from scratch. But I think that for me, it's going back into leading a company, building it. It energizes me. It's exciting. One of the things that I think is really unique about it is your biggest barriers are typically self-imposed, right? They're not your boss's issues. They're not, the CEO's problems. They're your problems, right? And so there's always this, there's always a path forward if you work hard enough and think through it and have the right vision, the opportunity. The fact that you can make it as big or as successful as you want is always what motivates me, right? Now, other people I think in the position are like, oh gosh, look, the floor can fall out of under us at any moment. But I guess I'm wired like I just look up, not down. So.
And when the floor is about to, anyway, you've experienced the floor about to fall out, fall from beneath you, for sure. When you think about your work, are there any decision rules that have guided you either explicitly or perhaps implicitly? How you decide to work on new things, maybe drop old things, or just things that aren't working, make changes, or double down on something that you think has more potential?
Yeah, I don't know that I have like a handbook of rules that I reference, but I think with what I've learned is that there's a ton of information out there, right? If you're listening to this podcast, you'll be receiving information, and I've listened to lots of different audiobooks. I've read, all the best practices for entrepreneurship and all this. And for me anyways, it's really hard to synthesize a lot of those ideas or guidelines or best practices until you've actually either tried to implement them and they went well or didn't go well, or you've had an experience of your own that helps synthesize that rule. And, I think a lot of times when I talk to older, more experienced business people, they say, well, part of it's just your gut, right? And it's, in a way it is, but the gut doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like you walk out of your, college degree program and you instantly have a gut instinct, right? And I think sometimes that can be misconstrued. And when somebody says trust your gut, it should probably be interpreted as trust your experience, right? And so having now started to build more and more experience, I think there's certain things that I've learned the hard way that I don't ever want to experience again. And so as I make decisions, I can reference those because there's still that feeling that you felt when you screwed up really bad, or when a door got slammed in your face, or when you pitched a deal that you were sure you were going to win and it fell out of underneath you. Those feelings stay with you. And so you can reference them the next time you're creeping back into a situation like that. You say, what do I need to do differently here to avoid that? And so, some of that is people. A big part of that's people, especially in business. Everything revolves around people, whether it's people you're selling to, people on your team that you're working with, people you need, financial backing from. And so people decisions are really important. And I would say that's probably one of the bigger changes in my journey that has happened now, is I'm very careful about the people that I'm surrounding myself with and choosing to work with and going into business with, because those are some of the hardest problems to resolve, because they're never, it's not transactional, or it shouldn't be. If you're a decent human, it shouldn't be entirely transactional. There's a whole emotional level there that you have to deal with as well. And it's really important to take the right amount of time, make the right decision there if you can. There's no perfect science to it, but it's a big learning, I guess, I've had over that time period.
On the last day of the entrepreneurship course, I now have I just call it Ask Anything. If you think I've left something out this semester, ask. And this semester, a student asked, what's your biggest regret, biggest mistake, kind of a thing. The list is long because I've been at this for a long time. But what I told him was, it's the people things that I messed up that still are hard to think about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what have you learned when you're looking for, you said, surround yourself with the right kind of people? What are some of those indicators of, the sort of people that you work effectively with, that you want to have on your team, that have, at least in the past, worked out as great teammates?
Yeah, I think the biggest factor is they have to be totally bought into the mission, right? Because at the end of the day, a company is not me, right? It's not Colin Hurd. It's not, my personality. And they may like me and they may not like me as a person on a day-to-day basis and how I deal with them. But if we can always go back to and center on the purpose of what we're doing, and we're concretely aligned on that, my experience is that results in a highly functioning relationship, because you will always have disagreements with people that you work with. And if you don't, you probably are not working with the right people, right? You need people that can challenge your thinking and help you grow. But if you can always use the foundation of your relationship together, which in business is the vision of that company, that's always a way to kind of recenter, I think. And so where I've screwed that up is when that vision isn't totally in alignment, right? And if you have people on the team that see it a different way than you at the highest level, that's really hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, do they care about the products and services that the company's offering?
Yeah, there's that too, for sure. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, do they want to go the same place you do with the company, right? Do they, maybe you want to exit the company for $100 million, right? Do they want to do what it takes to get there with you, or are they happy with a $10 million exit, right? There's a lot of decisions that get made differently depending on where they fall on that spectrum, right? And just as an example.
Mm-hmm. So this segues into maybe thinking about culture, and something that I think in business we talk about a lot, well, maybe even beyond business, about culture, but what it means, certainly debatable. But how do you think about cultural values at MACH and at your businesses? How do those values develop? And how do you see those values expressed in the people you work with? And I think you've touched on some of these things, but if you elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's an easy thing to overlook, despite a lot of people out there telling you need to pay attention to your company's cultural values. But at the end of the day, you're establishing to a degree the gut for your company, right? Just like you kind of have a gut instinct about certain things, that has to exist for your company as well in terms of how you make decisions. And so if an employee is faced with a decision about, whether to ship a product or not that may come back and, maybe it's not fully tested, but the customer really needs it, there can be a lot of innocent type decisions that, if you make a pattern out of, they can affect you in a major way, and it can be very hard to undo those. And so I think the gut instinct of the company is, when nobody's there to tell you what to do, how do you make the decision as a independent employee, as a part of the ecosystem that is the company? And so it's the thread that kind of gives employees an identity within the company, but also then helps you understand, what should I do when no one's looking, and how should I make a decision if my boss is gone and I can't ask the questions, and then his boss is like, how do I make the decision if the CEO is gone? And so in terms of forming culture, it's I used to think you could just walk in and say, look, here's what our culture is, right? It's not really the case. I think the best cultures are based on the value of the people that exist within the company to begin with, right? Everybody has some values, and maybe if they really struggle with that, they don't belong in the company. So you really try to find, what are the core things within the team today that you want to accent and highlight and bring forward. And then you start to articulate those in form of values, right? Try to put words around them. And
I think it almost can become like a company shared language kind of a thing. How do we talk about things, and how do we express values?
Yep. And it takes time, and it takes effort and molding, but you really have to kind of sculpt what exists rather than try to create something from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this part of the first season podcast is inspired by historic entrepreneur John Deere, and there will be 6 other entrepreneurs, most if not all entrepreneurs, learn some things to do, some things not to do from other entrepreneurs. As you think about past or present entrepreneurs, who are some key people that you've learned from or take inspiration from?
There's a lot, and I think I tried to spend a lot of my time understanding other people's journeys and stories, and trying to get a sense of decisions that they made that led them to certain places. There's a lot of inspiration that I'm sure many people take from Elon Musk, right? And there's a lot of stuff there that I can't relate to just because I think he's somewhat of a mad genius personality. But I think, what's inspirational about his story for our time and in our moment in history is that he has really, I think, redefined the American dream to a point where it's like, look, this immigrant kid came in and started really from nothing, right? And now he's one of the richest people in the world, and he's probably had more and will continue to have more impact on humanity than any other figure within our time period. And so it's cool to be a part of that, like in the span of history,
and talk about thinking big.
Yeah, right. Really, there's there's no problem that basically any major problem in society or related to technology just takes it on and finds a way to do it, right?
Can humanity survive a planetary extinction event?
Right.
He's working on it.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, it's hard not to take inspiration from him as an entrepreneur. And then, there's a lot of other great entrepreneurs sort of in our lifetime that you can take inspiration from. But I also think I try to surround myself with as many entrepreneurs as I can, because there's definitely a lot that we can learn from each other. And so I'm always looking to make those connections, whether it's in a related industry or not, and learn.
Well, any additional advice for aspiring entrepreneurs?
It's probably if somebody comes to me and asks me, it really depends on the stage, right? So, but at the end of the day, if there's an opportunity or a problem, I'd say always start with the problem. Don't start with the technology, right? I've seen a lot of companies really struggle because they're, engineer founded, and the engineer is brilliant and understands the technology very well and wants to find a problem to solve with it. And then they start a company before they found that problem, right? So I'd say that's always the biggest thing. And
solution in search of a problem can be a really sad situation.
Yeah, it's a big struggle for a number of companies, and especially in this environment where we're at economically right now, a lot of venture capital is changing the standard for what they'll invest in, and so it's really, really important to get early customer traction. Take the mantra from Steve Blank, right, and do that customer discovery. Get your MVP out there in front of people and learn as much as you can before spending any money, right? You really don't need any money to talk to people. You just got to have a cell phone and some internet to find out who you need to talk to, but it's always really valuable.
Yeah. Well, Colin, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.